Welcome everybody who's here in person. Thank you so much for coming to this event. Welcome everybody everybody who's joining us online. It's great to have us all here today, and great to have this hybrid event. So we're delighted to be in the Resilience Hub, beaming messages into COP and out of COP to draw people together and build momentum around adaptation and resilience. My name is Anna Carthy. I'm a researcher at IIED, the International Institute of Environment and Development, and IIED alongside IDE, International Development Enterprises, and CIF, the Climate Investment Funds, have co-organised this session. So this session is part of this growing global movement around locally led adaptation, which includes the 8 principles for locally led adaptation and the growing number of endorsing agencies. So this is the first of 4 LLA locally led adaptation sessions at the Resilience Hub over the next 2 weeks. And these sessions will all build upon 6 regional dialogues that we've been having on scaling up locally led adaptation across Africa, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean over the past 2 months, in collaboration with a range of organizations, including the COP26 presidency, the Adaptation Action Coalition, the Race to Resilience, CADP, SDI, Save the Children, South-South North, CANARI, ICAD, ENDA, the WARU Commission, IIED, and WRI. So this session today is going to explore how local government authorities have been leading climate adaptation around the world and showcasing how local governments are successfully implementing inclusive climate action and climate adaptation at the local level. So we're showing a range of experiences of implementing locally led adaptation, and we have some great speakers for you to talk about how local governments are and have been doing this in practice and really applying this theoretical idea in reality. So one thing we really hope will resonate from this session is that we'll see that there's a proof of concept of how locally led adaptation works in reality. So it's not just theoretical, it has and is working, and these examples will show how effective it can be to get adaptation accomplished on the ground. So the key step now is not about testing more pilots or getting more evidence, it's about scaling and accessing finance. The idea behind the locally led adaptation principles, behind locally led adaptation, is summarized in the 8 principles for LLA. With these examples today, we'll show how the LLA principles have been operationalized in practice, and we hope to dig more deeply into that during the Q&A in the second half of the session. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the agenda. First of all, we'll begin with an overview of the principles, presented by Eileen Rayna Cunningham from CADP, the Centre for the Autonomy and Development of Indigenous Peoples, and the Active Observer, the Green Climate Fund for CSOs from developing countries. And then we'll have 5 cases presented from around the world. So firstly, we'll have Diksha Bijlani, who will join us from the Climate Investment Funds and discuss examples of the pilot program for climate resilience in Zambia and Cambodia. And Diksha is joining us virtually. Secondly, we'll have Jen Abdellah, who's here in person from the Near East Foundation, who will discuss decentralized climate finance in Mali and Senegal. Thirdly, Madan Poudel from International Development Enterprises will present work on the LAPAs in Nepal, and Madan is also joining us virtually. Fourthly, we'll have Muzang from ICAD here to discuss the Climate Resilient Migrant-Friendly Towns Initiative in Bangladesh, and Muzang is here in person beside Jen. And then lastly, we'll have Landing Sana, who's joining us virtually from the Gambia, where he's chairman of the Mansakoko Area Council, and he'll discuss UNCDF's local climate adaptive living facility alongside Ramon Cervera. So each speaker is going to have a little time buzzer horn sound when you have 1 minute to go, and then we'll round off the session with the Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you along to Eileen to give us an overview of the principles for locally led adaptation.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, I'm going to use this. Tutni Yamni. My name is Eileen Mairena. Good evening. I came from the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, and I'm indigenous Miskito from the Caribbean coast, and I've been involved with IIED and WRI in all this process of discussion about the local-led adaptation. So today I want to give you an overview of this global movement on locally led adaptation, including the 8 principles for LLA, and also the headline from the sixth dialogue on scaling up that took place in September and October across Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America and the Caribbean. There has been a growing momentum around not only adaptation, but about locally led adaptation, with the idea that this local actor, and we're talking about women, youth, children, persons with disabilities, displaced persons, indigenous peoples, and caste and racial and ethnic minority group that has been marginalized, having an agency over design, prioritization, and or to deliver of adaptation. So locally led adaptation is not simply when adaptation benefits are targeted at local actors. So that includes also that LDC leadership, that there is a commitment to get the 70% of their climate finance to the local level by 2030 as part of their LDC initiative of effective adaptation and resilience. Also the Global Commission on Adaptation of Local Action Track, championed by Sheila Patel and Dr. Mohamed Musa. This led to the 8 principles of LLA. This 8 principle and the importance of the LLA has since been reiterated and supported by the UK co-presidency, Alok Sharma, and has been welcomed by the G7 foreign minister and by the Adaptation Action Coalition and Race Resilience. And there are some people that say that this could be the LLA COP. We will see if that is possible. So about the 8 principles of LLA, these were launched of the Global Commission on Adaptation and Local Action Track in January this year in the Climate Adaptation Summit. These were co-developed with input from over 50 organizations over several years. And right now, 57 organizations have now endorsed this principle, and that include CATP, my organization, and also Wankitangni, that is a local-led organization of indigenous women in my communities. Others include multilateral climate funds, international NGOs, bilateral donors, research institutions, and grassroots organizations. These 8 principles are designed to guide more inclusive and more impactful adaptation, focused on the knowledge and expertise of local actors. So now I'm going to show you the 8 principles. The principle 1 is developing decision-making to the lowest appropriate level. The principle 2 is addressing structural inequalities faced by women, youth, children, people with disabilities, displaced people, indigenous people, and marginalized ethnic groups. The principle 3, providing patient and predictable funds that can be accessed more easily. And the principle 4, investing in local capabilities to leave an institutional legacy. The principle 5, building a robust understanding of climate risk and uncertainty. Principle 6, flexible programming and learning. The 7, ensure transparency and accountability. 8, collaborative action and investment. If you are interested in endorsing and join the growing LLA community of practice and share your own LLA experience, please get in touch with IID of WRI. So to build in this growing momentum, and Anatole at the beginning, we had been part of a consortium of 10 organizations that deliver 6 regional dialogue on scaling up LLA actions across Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America and the Caribbean. These dialogues, they were really inspiring, and they show 11 inspiring case studies of delivering locally led adaptation. And you will hear more today about the role and innovation by local governments. And there was very interesting headline that came for that. Okay, I'm just going to, because my time is done, I'm going to raise some. There is this idea for a call of 1 or 5 billion locally led fund that call at COP, because there is 680 billion funding for fossil fuel subsidy that could be used for locally led through NGOs, civil society, and indigenous people group. And I think there is a lot of other headlines that came for this. And I think one of the important things from my point of view is about local traditional and indigenous groups that can provide trust and network needed to deliver effective LLA based on understanding the local policy, economy, possessing establishing network, and understanding the surrounding of natural environment. I think it's very important to include that in all this process. And also, how we're going to engage in all this process with the private sector, but also with very strong safeguard in all this process. So thank you very much. We can even discuss more about this. Sorry, Spanglish. But I'm back to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Eileen. So we're now going to have, before we dive into the cases, we're going to do a quick poll. So if we can get the Mentimeter code up on the screen. So if you can go to www.menti.com and use the code on the screen, we're going to start off with a couple of short questions to get us thinking about locally led adaptation and what the concept means. So 58126220 is the code. And if we can get the Menti to show on the screen so we can see everybody's answers coming in, that would be fantastic. So we're having Diksha to share the Mentimeter screen to show all the answers coming in. So thanks a mil, Diksha. It would be great to get that up now. So you'll see when you go into the Menti, there should be the first question is, which of the following is true regarding local actors' access to finance? So firstly, less than 10% of funds from global climate funds are dedicated to local action. Secondly, LDCs have committed to spending 70% of their climate finance at the local level by 2030. And thirdly, despite a commitment of 25%, only 2.1% of humanitarian aid goes to local actors. So we have a bit of a range of answers. We did say that you can select all that apply. And in fact, all of these apply, so they're all true. So it's maybe a little bit of a tricky question that all of them are true. But yes, we recently published research showing that there's less than 10% of global climate funds finance reaching the local level. As Eileen was explaining, the LDCs have committed to spending 70% of their climate finance at the local level. And despite a long-standing commitment towards localization among humanitarian actors, still only 2.1% of humanitarian aid goes to local actors. So we have one more question before jumping into the cases, which is, which of the factors below are barriers to effective locally led adaptation? So the first is poor decentralization with power concentrated at higher levels. Second is locally led efforts do not scale well. Thirdly is a lack of predictable funding to invest in local institutions' capacity. And lastly is corruption at the local level. So this time around, I can confirm that not all of the answers are correct. So we have some incorrect answers in the mix, so no need to tick all of them. So great, we have a range of answers coming in. Okay. So those of you who selected the first answer, you are indeed right. Poor decentralization with power concentrated at higher levels. And that's really covered in the principles for locally led adaptation, where we're emphasizing the devolution of power. And the other correct answer was green. So it was the lack of predictable funding to invest in local institutions' capacity. So the two ones that are kind of faded out were not the case. So locally led efforts do not scale up well. Well, anybody who clicked that one, we're hoping to demonstrate in this session that that's not the case, that they do scale up and that they are effective. And then the final one was kind of a myth buster to try and challenge some of the assumptions around corruption. And so thank you all very much for participating in the poll. I'm going to hand over to Marek to introduce our speakers.
Thanks so much, Anna. And it's a pleasure to be here and in person with many of you who we've been interacting with over the course of the last few months as part of these dialogues on scaling up locally led adaptation. So my name is Marek Sones from the International Institute for Environment and Development. I'm a researcher within the climate change group and focusing on local-led adaptation. And I'm really excited to hear from the panelists here today and virtually. So 3 virtual panelists and 2 here in person on, addressing those questions that Anna asked about how can we really take local-led adaptation to scale. So without further ado, it's a pleasure to introduce our first virtual panelist, Diksha Bijlani, who is going to introduce some of the experiences from Cambodia and Zambia from the climate investment funds, from the pilot program for climate resilience. So hopefully over virtually to Diksha, who's going to introduce our first examples of scaling up local-led adaptation.
Thanks a lot, Merrick, and it's wonderful to be here, and I'm really excited to be talking about, because as Anna mentioned, these things do work, and hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate that through the session. So I'll be talking about the case of Zambia and Cambodia through the pilot program for climate resilience, which offers concessional resources to some of the most vulnerable developing countries in carrying out climate adaptation and resilience activities. And before we dive in to the cases itself, I would like to announce that the pilot program for climate resilience is launching a new report today at this event, which is it's an in-depth case study of PPCR projects in 8 countries, 2 of which I'll be presenting today. But if you want to read more insights into these particular countries and also others, you're welcome to read the report, which is now live under the SIF website's Knowledge Center. So let's dive right in to Zambia first. The PPCR project in Zambia aimed to mainstream climate adaptation into local development plans. And following the government's decentralization policy, it was implemented through local government authorities. And local government authorities were asked to follow a participatory approach to conduct the vulnerability assessment. So a lot of vulnerable groups like those living with HIV/AIDS, women-headed households, youth were identified, and their needs were factored into the resilience building activities that were identified. And also the project, in order to be implemented through these local government authorities, first conducted a needs analysis of these institutions, of district councils itself, to see where they had implemented donor-funded projects and what are the needs that the PPCR project would need to support. So in that sense, it also built the capacity of these local government authorities in procurement, in financial management, and also in just in mainstreaming climate adaptation into their planning, really. It did face 2 major challenges. One was that the local government staff was rotated frequently, which was a huge challenge when it came to retaining the continuity and also retaining the capacity that was built. And the second was that not only was mainstreaming climate adaptation a new thing, also the participatory approach that they were asked to follow, which was sort of like a gender-sensitive vulnerability assessment, was sort of new to local officials who had issues integrating it into the existing roles and responsibilities, and also given their bandwidth constraints, managing the rest of activities at the ward level or the district level that they do. And the way that it addressed these challenges was for the high staff turnover. Local graduates who spoke the local language were hired as permanent project staff, and these, in order to build an in-house capacity of climate adaptation specialists, and these participatory adaptation trainings really helped by sharing their knowledge with the local government staff, and thereby retained capacity for the new staff that was coming in. It also hired 10 local NGOs actually as climate risk and adaptation facilitators, and their job was to also facilitate the participatory project. In fact, one crucial point is that this project actually ensured the buy-in of the traditional leadership also of these communities, like the Barotse royal establishment, which had a king and the indigenous traditional chiefs, to ensure that there was community buy-in in carrying out the climate risk assessments, which then fed into the activities that the project funded. And when it came to the top-down approaches, it ensured that it was offering tools like a gender-sensitive vulnerability tool for the staff to use, so that they had some guidance on what they were supposed to be doing. And also the central level project coordinating unit used both informal and formal mechanisms to ensure that this process, especially in the beginning, was working smoothly. Then similar things were observed in Cambodia, but specifically this project was focused on building the capacity of local officials in mainstreaming gender into climate change. So how they did this was offer specialized, first of all, training to local officials in how gender can be integrated into climate adaptation, and also that training in financial management and procurement. And then it also mobilized civil society by establishing a civil society support mechanism wherein 18 local CSOs were trained in how they could mainstream climate change adaptation and disaster risk preparedness into their operations, and then given grants to carry out sub-projects in 17 provinces in collaboration with local officials. And this collaboration really helped ensure that these projects were taking into account gender, and a lot of projects actually ended up being implemented with a lot of gender sensitive needs in mind. So it does work, and the results show that. So and I mean, I won't go through all these specific results, but I will say that this process helped to mainstream climate resilience and really move away from the business as usual approach into ensuring that climate resilience and adaptation was a core part of planning that local officials carry out. And it also helped, in line with one of the principles of adaptation that we heard before, it helped develop the understanding at the beneficiary level, understanding of climate risk, and also activities that could be carried out in order to address this climate risk. So for more insights into how other countries like Nepal and Jamaica and St. Vincent and Grenadines and others also did this and also engaged local stakeholders to ensure the benefits were more equitable, you can read the report, which is live on the CIP website today. Thank you.
So thanks so much, Dishka. That's really fantastic. And some key enablers there on utilising enabling policy, importance of collaboration, on building institutional and sustained capacity at the local government levels. That's really, really interesting to hear. And hopefully, moving to our next in-person participant, Jen Abdellah from the Near East Foundation, who's going to share some experiences on decentralising climate funds in Mali. So over to you, Jen.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay? And can we start the slides? Is that possible? Here? Okay, great. So the work that I'm going to discuss was a collaborative effort among the Near East Foundation, IIED, and IDE EFRIC, funded by the UK government through the BRACED program. We piloted decentralized climate funds in Mali and Senegal from 2015 to 2019, and this work was informed in part based on work happening in East Africa that IIED and its counterparts supported. The purpose really of the decentralized climate funds was to address the problems that are behind the locally led adaptation principles, putting decision-making and money at the local level where communities are confronted every day with climate impacts. So it was an alternative then to the sort of traditional business as usual top-down implementation of climate adaptation investments. Can I go to the next slide, please? So the mechanism of the DCF varies in place to place depending on the context, but the general infrastructure is the same in that it's using the architecture of decentralized governance to move money from the national level down to local communities and marrying that with bottom-up planning and implementation at the local level, so that local priorities for adaptation are surfacing and that they're informing the types of adaptation that are happening, and that the implementation of those projects is happening at the local level by local committees. So in the case, I'm going to speak about Mali, although this would be true more also in Senegal and in East Africa. In the existing national infrastructure for flowing money down to decentralized governments, we employed that. And then we created committees at the local level, the most local level of government, the commune level, and then also at the CERC and the regional level, employing sort of the idea of subsidiarity that's also reflected in the LLA principles, so that decision making was made at the level that was nearest to where the adaptation investment would be made. The local adaptation committees were created within sort of the context of the local government, and they included elected officials, they included resource users, they included women, they included youth. Each committee used then agreed criteria to identify investments that were made, that were surfaced from the community through a series of assessments, and also proposals that came from the community level. They used agreed upon criteria, but the local committees acted with autonomy in selecting and implementing those investments. So we can go to the next one. The guiding principles for DCF preceded the locally led adaptation principles, but you'll see there's quite a bit of overlap. These were focused around inclusive planning. So women are included in the committees. They're included, the resilience assessments were done in a gender-sensitive way. And the criteria used to select investments were also gender-sensitive. There was a strong focus on building the capacities of local government and the local adaptation committees to use publicly accepted procurement processes. This increased transparency and accountability and lended to the legitimacy of the process. Going, I think, also to Anna's point on whether corruption was sort of an impediment. It actually helped to strengthen the government within that respect. In terms of the locally led aspects, there was a real strong emphasis, as I said, on surfacing ideas and valuing the adaptive strategies that already existed within communities that were constantly dealing with variability and shocks. These are Sahelian communities that are confronting aridity, variability, conflict, and so they had good strategies to draw upon. And then I think going to the next slide, if we could. The results were creating this infrastructure in both Mali and in Senegal, building capacity for the public procurement, for improved planning processes that were more inclusive than traditional, and integrating those within the local development planning processes that already existed. So there was a real emphasis on integrating the work that we were doing with the existing governance infrastructure, so that we weren't being duplicative, but we were also then strengthening that infrastructure. And then finally, we supported these local communities with project funds flowing down through this infrastructure and implemented through the community processes, 150 investments that reached over 1 million people. And that was about 3.7 million pounds of funding. So what did we learn? We learned that this is a viable and potentially transformative model for putting the principles for locally led adaptation into practice. this is a potentially viable and transformative way to get money to local communities in a way that is effective and has value for money. And in terms of where we go from here, we've worked now with our counterparts in Mali to develop a next phase, to scale this mechanism with the local government and the government of Mali really taking the driver's seat, and with technical support where there's a need, but where the scaling up can really happen driven by the governments themselves.
Thanks so much, Jen. That's another, I guess, really interesting example, particularly on identifying the most appropriate levels for making decision making, and again, the importance of utilizing existing structure to value the adaptive strategies that local people have. So thanks so much, Jen. So over to our third panelist now, and again another virtual panelist, and it's my pleasure to introduce Madan Poudel from IDE in Nepal, who's going to provide some experiences of the local adaptation plans of action and collaborative adaptation strategies from communities from Nepal. So hopefully over to Madan.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much. My slides, yeah. I don't see my slides here, yeah. Can you share it here in the screen?
Yeah, we can see them, Madan, yeah.
No, it's not coming full here. I can't see it here.
Madan, they're on our screen, so do you want to just let us know when we should change to the next slide?
Yeah, I can't see the screen actually. Can it be made bigger?
Yeah, we can all see it here. We'll work on it to show it virtually. If it's okay to just continue, and we'll move the slides when you let us know.
I just want you to see the slides actually. The slides I can't see. How can I see the slides actually? It didn't come full. Can I share my own screen?
Yeah, Madam, we can see the slides. Is it possible for you to put the slides on your screen, and we'll do our best this end to get them on your screen?
Yeah, can I start now?
Yep, we can see them. Can you see them now?
No, very small one, but yeah, I can see now. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can see now. Yeah. Okay, my title actually. My presentation is on local adaptation plans for action, experiences for Anukulan-based project in Nepal. I will be reflecting on the experiences of Anukulan-based project, and I would like to highlight how local governments in Nepal have played vital roles in coordinating, formulating, and implementing local adaptation plans for action. Basically reflecting on the experiences of Anukulan-based project, which was implemented from 2015 to 2019 in mid and far western region of Nepal with the support of the government of the UK. In Nepal, there are three major policies which are, guiding the local adaptation planning process. There is a National Adaptation Program of Action, a National Framework for Local Adaptation Plans for Action, and National Climate Change Policy. And Anukulan, through this project, we facilitated 41 LAPAs for over 202 million people. And the main features were the committee formation, chaired by mayor and chairperson local municipality, impact and intervention identification, which included identifying impacts of climate change, and also identifying the interventions across agriculture, forestry, watershed conservation, water, energy, and infrastructure. And finally, harmonization with the DRR plan, which is harmonizing local climate change adaptation action with disaster risk reduction planning. The LAPA development process included 6 steps: climate change awareness and capacity building, risk and vulnerability analysis and profiling, identification of climate change adaptation and disaster risk management strategies, integration and mainstreaming of CCA and DRRM strategies into periodic plan and development policies, integration and mainstreaming of CCA and DRRM strategies into annual budget planning and M&E policies, processes, and planning and implementation of activities at household, local community and users group levels. And the implementation consisted of 3 different phases: district level vulnerability assessment, LAPA preparation at municipal level, LAPA implementation. And in all the 3 phases, the project provided capacity development support for implementation of LAPA and technical support and monitoring, mentoring and coaching supports. The key participatory tools used in the LAPA preparation were seasonal calendar, historical timeline, scenario development, resources and hazard mapping, vulnerability ranking, institutional mapping, multi-criteria index, and adaptation plan. The main findings were LAPA represents a governance intervention bringing together local stakeholders to learn and develop the LAPAs. A key is capacity building of individuals and local organizations in climate change and basic capacities. LAPAs create enabling investments and demand for climate smart agriculture technologies. LAPA enables community-based enterprises that provide environmental services, and Anupula demonstrated the importance of harmonizing LAPA with DRR plans, avoiding duplication, and to cope with natural disasters, including investments in early warning systems. Now, the sustainability is ensured by endorsement of LAPA through endorsement of LAPA by municipal council, resource allocation, major resource allocation by municipality for LAPA implementation, and a well-functioning multi-stakeholder bodies at local level for LAPA formulation, implementation, and monitoring. And the lessons learned were local level multi-stakeholder body is an effective mechanism for LAPA implementation. Mobilizing local resources for LAPA implementation induces community ownership and sustainability. Building local capacity constitutes an important element of LAPA. And LAPA is a live document, reviewed and revised, refined each year as per the need. And the way forward and suggested recommendations, recommended actions are link market systems with climate adaptation planning, strengthen farmer and rural organizations, promote public-private partnerships. And let me conclude by saying LAPA has been an effective mechanism for building resilience and improving livelihoods of poor climate vulnerable people. The local governments have played key role in the success of LAPA, and Nepal experiences of LAPA could be useful to many countries for building resilience and adaptive capacities of climate vulnerable people and communities. And thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madan, and thank you for, you managed to do that incredibly succinctly given the technological challenges, so thank you so much. And that was a really interesting case, and I guess you talked about the importance of getting local governments, in your case municipalities, to ensure the sustainability of the approach and utilising this local adaptation planning of action framework, and the importance of multi-stakeholder bodies. That's incredibly interesting, and hopefully, without further ado, our next speaker can build upon that. So it's my pleasure again to introduce, at this time, Professor Muzang from ICAD, who is going to introduce the Bangladesh Climate Resilient Migrant Friendly Town case study. So over to you, Muzang.
Yeah. Thank you, Marek, and IID colleagues for inviting me from a country I represent, which I will call the most environmentally predicated country in the world in terms of the total population likely to be already being impacted. Just in 2019, we had more than 4 million people displaced by climate events. And you can imagine 165 million population is squeezed in a land 65 times smaller than America, but having half of American population. But thanks God that we have one of the most fertile land on earth. That is why we could survive. And if there is no climate event, then we are self-sufficient in food. And foreigners cannot believe this miracle, And so, historically, Bangladesh has been a capital-centric country, Dhaka-centric country. But for the last few years, we are trying to change. The civil society and the government also is trying to initiate a process whereby This climate refugees, climate displaced people, instead of moving, allowing them to move to Dhaka and other large cities, we are trying to redirect them to satellite towns and growth centers where heavy government investments and infrastructure investments are happening. And for the last 3-4 years, ICAD, my center, had been working with few mayors and municipal authorities of some cities away from Dhaka to make those towns environment friendly, climate resilient friendly. Because this is a great challenge, because you know those towns have got their own priorities. And on top of that, now we have to add to the adaptation plan and resilience plan. But the main constraints we find is capacity building and climate finance. As Jane has rightly mentioned about that, for this we need to default down the climate funding, which the local communities still don't have. 2-3% of the total financing, even adaptation financing, reaches down to the local level. As our first presenter has mentioned, that LDC has got this 70% of the plan by 2030, 70% of the climate finance to deliver down to the local level, but still it's a dream. And for the last 20 years, I have been serving as a climate finance negotiator from Bangladesh, so I'm absolutely frustrated about this climate financing. The delivery plan that the two ministers from Germany and Canada have published, we are not happy about that, and I have written a critic. Tomorrow it will be published in our National English Daily. So this is a great challenge, but Bangladesh government also is absolutely with us. We have a plan, national, it's called a long-term, kind of long-named strategy, National Strategy for Management of Climate and Disaster-Induced Internal Displacement, which has got a very good framework, comprehensive framework with 3 phases: the pre-disaster phase, the during the disaster, and post-disaster. But we are talking about the pre-disaster phase. If we can, establish these climate resilient, migrant-friendly towns, then I think we can be successful. And here, 3 issues we have mentioned. One of our articles published in Science in June, where we have explored our idea. You can get it. 3 elements. For example, climate finance is one of the prime element, capacity building, as well as the stakeholder participation, wider participation. Otherwise, you cannot do it in a land of scarcity. Bangladesh is, you all agree that evidence-based fact that necessity is the mother of invention. So we don't have any space for relocation inland. So we have to accommodate all these displaced people within land. And globally, more than 85% of the people settle inside. And that is what our research in Bangladesh also done internationally in peer-reviewed journals published, that even Bangladeshi people, overwhelming people, want to settle in their own places, provided this get support from the government as well as from the international sources. But international sources are very, very poor. Adaptation finance, 1/5 of climate finance goes still for adaptation. And that is where the cracks, because adaptation still is viewed, and resilience building still is viewed from a narrow neoclassical economic perspective, that only as if it brings local or maximum national public good. But this we need to expand the framing of adaptation and resilience. That is what one of my last article published in Climate Exchange contains, that idea, that we need to regard adaptation and resilience as kind of a global public good. And that is likely to bring in more finance. How much time? I can continue talking.
1 minute left. 1 minute.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, that we are working in partnership with BRAC, for example, the largest NGO in the world. BRAC has got a larger program covering 20 towns and cities. We have started, ICAD has started with 2 towns in the southwest part of Bangladesh, but we are a partner of BRAC, so we have a very, very big plan to establish this. We are trying to do it, this learning by doing, because this is a new concept out of the necessity that we have in Bangladesh, and it will take a few years still. For the last 2-3 years, what we have the lessons is that if there is good investment, then people will not move to the large cities and crowding the slums already overcrowded. And then the people who are displaced have got great agency. So once given an opportunity for some training and little capital, then they can promote their agency and they establish, small businesses. So we have already proven evidences that those are very successful cases. Oh.
Thanks so much. That's incredibly interesting to add to the three examples of local government approaches and the importance, it seems, of a strong state plan to really think about those bigger risks of migration that are happening due to climate change. Thank you so much, Professor Muzang Khan. And over to our final speaker, a virtual speaker again. Hopefully 2 interventions. Firstly from Landing Sana, who is going to tell us a bit about the UNCDF's local adaptive climate living facility and the experiences that's been playing in supporting local government-driven approaches for climate resilience. So hopefully over virtually to Landing Sana.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Good day to you all. Like you said, I'm Landing Bisane, and I am the chairman, Mansakonko Area Council. Also the president of Gambia Local Government Authorities. I will be presenting on our experience working with the UNCF, CDF intervention, which in short we call job, skills, and finance. I will try to first give you a little bit of background about the project intervention. It started in 2018. It's a 4-year project and it's ending in 2020. The package is 15.2 million and it's targeting young people and women. Of course, it's a European Union funded program and it's implemented by the UN Capital Development Fund and also the ITC, that is the International Trade Center. The project has 3 different components. We have the component called local, which is implemented by the Ministry of Local Government. And we have another component called the skills part of it, which is implemented by the Ministry of Higher Education. And we have another component that is finance, being implemented by the Ministry of Finance and CBG, that's the Central Bank of the Gambia. So the intervention is called job, skills, and finance. So you have 3 major areas that are very key to supporting youth and women, particularly at the grassroots level. Now, what the project intends to achieve includes, of course, inclusive and sustainable growth, as well as employment for young people and women. And in that, the project will intend to increase employability for youth and women, also improve equal access to inclusive finance, also improve TVET. TVET is technical vocational education and training. Also improve on regulatory frameworks on the finance sector. The job, skills, and finance started in 2018, and coincidentally, that is the time I took over office newly, and we launched it in 2018. And the project envelope is supposed to provide financial service to 100,000 people. Of course, this is youth and women. It also intends to provide 3,500 skills training for Gambian youth and women. Also increasing governance, structural adjustment in terms of capacity and skills. And this is specifically targeting my area, which is the local governance and decentralized structures. It also intends to create 6,000 temporal jobs and establish a good working relationship between the different layers of the decentralized structures. Now, before I go further, I must give you a little bit of background about decentralization in the Gambia. Local government decentralization is in 3 layers. In the Gambia, you have the local government authority at the apex level, and you have the ward development committees at the middle level, and you have the village or town development committees. So this project intends to work with these different structures, but mainly with the village development committees and the ward development committees. So at the apex level there, the local government authority is there to facilitate and support to make sure that the project is implemented in line with the project plans and aspirations. When I narrow it down to my own local government area, the project is working, started working in 4 wards. That is the ward committees in 4 areas. And that was the pilot phase. And a year later, which is this year, 4 other wards were added. So now, as we speak, the project is working with 8 wards out of 12 in my area. So far, what has been achieved is highly tremendous because there is a lot that the project has done in terms of skills training, in terms of cash for work, which is a very, very important component of the project that tends to promote local economic development for the targeted youth and women, because then they provide labor and they get some economic gains in the returns. So you would see that the project funds stay within the locality. And in the process as well, they also realize some form of development. So all the work that is being done, particularly the expertise labor, is done by the local people themselves. So they will be paid from that, and they will get some economic gains. But in the process, they will also get benefit from some basic development in terms of their needs and aspirations. So by that, so far, the project has implemented 12 interventions, which include bridges, that is culverts, women horticultural gardens, integrated garden facilities, poultry for women and youth, and also some maintenance of some connecting roads, feeder roads between communities. Most of these interventions are normally identified as needs of the communities that the project is implemented. So you will want to see that it's not interventions imposed on the people, but rather these are interventions that have been identified as needs of the communities of the area that the project will invest into. And whatever investment also is done through the people, because the Ward Development Committee and the Village Development Committee will sit over it, vet the need that is being presented and what budget it will attract, and then go and withdraw from their account and do the necessary investment to benefit the people. So the projects or the interventions is basically managed by the people themselves through their different structures. That is the Village Development Committee, the Ward Development Committee, or the local government area. But of course, with very good supervision of the implementing partner and the key stakeholders involved in the process. So this is purely an empowerment intervention. So we owe a lot the UNCDF intervention. It's one of its kind. It's not one of the implementing projects that is being imposed or that funds are just disbursed and is implemented by somebody at the central level, and that the beneficiaries would not have that much hand in it. But rather, it is the opposite. The beneficiaries decide on what they want to do, and the UNCDF and its partners facilitate and provide the support as it's required to benefit the people. To conclude, I will give you this quick summary. So far, in all the wards that the projects, the interventions have been done, there has been some direct and indirect gains in terms of skills, in terms of finance, and in terms of jobs. So far, 317 people have benefited from the cash for work. That is 315 within this 17, within these 2 years, have benefited from the cash for work so far in my area. And in the particular wards, okay, I think I have in the particular wards, the breakdown can be available to you later, but the videos are available. I think that could be shared for you to see what the interventions are like. But maybe if there are questions, for the sake of time, I would stop here. But in general, this project is UNCDF intervention is very much supportive to the local aspirations, particularly the local government area, because it's perfectly in line with our local strategy. That is our development strategic plan of the area, and has contributed a lot to changing lives of the people in my area. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Landing Sana. That's another fantastic example of utilizing the structures that are in place for local government to really support, as Landing you put so clearly, that these are the priorities and the needs of local communities. These are not top-down interventions that are putting on the identifying priorities without local communities. They're utilizing those structures to really support the needs that communities have identified. So thanks so much. And indeed, you asked about questions, and I think now we have a little bit less time than we'd originally planned, but I think around 25 minutes, give or take. A few minutes for some questions, either general questions or specific questions to our 3 virtual or 2 physical panelists. So I see one hand up, and I'm just going to check with my colleagues, Anna, if there's any virtual questions. So first, maybe we'll go for a first in-person question, and then during that time, Anna, if I could get the virtual questions.
Hi, thank you very much. It was really fascinating presentations. Thank you. It's a general question rather than to one specific panelist, but just I'm from the International Committee of the Red Cross, and we work a lot with communities in conflict. And I wondered the importance that all of you really put across of investing and in supporting locally led government and communities. How is that affected in your experience and in your research by conflict also being another battle that communities are facing, and how that often sadly weakens institutions? So just any thoughts around that would be great. Thank you.
Super. So first question is, I guess it's on the, how does conflict interact with these examples of utilizing local government? So I think that's a general question to all the panelists. So perhaps maybe our physical panelists first. Does anyone want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. So in the region of Mopti in Mali, that is an area that has been affected by conflict and sort of persistent insecurity since 2012. The centralized government is perhaps less effective in that region because of its inability to really have a strong presence there, and that also is a driver of the conflict itself. People feel neglected. So strengthening local government and creating a legitimate way forward for local concerns around adaptation to be sort of implemented, it can actually strengthen and create sort of positive channels for dialogue. It can create social cohesion around shared efforts. So, and we actually, anecdotally, we don't have hard data, we did see that there was some reduction in migration from places where there was more economic sort of stability because of the adaptation investments that were implemented, which can also then impact drivers of conflict. So conflict in some ways made the work harder in terms of actually physically going out, but there's a very strong emphasis on building the capacity of local governments to do monitoring and evaluation of the projects themselves. And so to the extent that this is really something that's meant to be autonomous within the local community, it creates a mechanism for development in conflict-affected places despite conflict.
Yeah, I can.
So thanks so much, Jen. Ms. M, would you like to add to that?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. That is the most important question for implementation of the locally led adaptation, because as I argue, for example, as a university professor, that the function of the national government is just to facilitate for a conducive legal and policy institutional framework for adaptation. But it is the local people, local communities who have to take the lead, because climate impacts don't happen in the earth. They happen in some spaces, and those spaces are local. That is why here there is responsibility both from the development partner side as well as from the national government side. Development partners have to be a little more sincere in looking into the fact that their money is utilized better, not just delivering it through the central government and after 2-3 years project completed, tick marks, all these results done, submitted, report submitted, not that. You have to, development partners have to be a little more, kind of a little more investigative. This is, and national governments, as Jen has mentioned, we need to do devolution down to the local level, and that is a challenge in most of the developing countries because we have a very centralized power structure. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. I just want to check, does anyone of our virtual participants, Diksha, Madan, or Landing, want to come in on that question on conflict response?
Yeah.
Ramon. Oh, Ramon, yep.
Yeah, okay. I would want to come in. My colleague Ramon has problem with his connectivity. With regards to conflict, I think the Red Cross probably will be the best experts to define conflict. But in my situation, you will understand, that women and youth are part of the most vulnerable and deprived or underprivileged. So in which case, the interventions has really contributed a lot in reducing particularly domestic violence or conflicts. Because there and then, this project has created opportunity to create jobs and access to finance for the women and young people. And we all know what that means. Because then there will be some reduction in terms of conflicts at the level of the families. And on the other hand as well, these marginalized people normally go to the bush to cut the forest for either charcoal or firewood or other economic gains. But the project has, through the project intervention, because of the opportunity in terms of access to job, finance, and other skills, it has reduced that tendency for women and youth to go into the land, to the bush and cut the forest. In which case, if that is done, sometimes there is some form of conflicts in the communities because communities will be obliged to sometimes resist people from cutting their forest. And there will be some here and there domestic interferences and conflicts. So in our case, actually, it has greatly contributed to reducing the domestic aspect of conflict in the communities, particularly at the household level.
Thank you so much, Landing. So that's really, really interesting. Again, additional insights on that local level conflicts that's already also helped reduce not only just working with those within those conflict environments. Anna, would we like to go to some virtual questions? Yep.
So we have some great virtual questions coming in from the chat. So the first one is from Lina Ababne, and she says, question to all of the presenters. I'm wondering if you can give insights on how to overcome stakeholders' lack of trust, if you find that exists as a challenge. So how you've overcome stakeholders' lack of trust. So I don't know if Jen or Professor Muzang, you would like to come in on that?
Lack of trust in the governance structures is how I'm understanding that question probably means. We started with really participatory resilience assessments at the community level that brought together stakeholders from different sort of user groups, so farmers, herders, fishers, women, government officials, technical folks from the government, and started there. I think that was a really important step in the process. The other thing is by virtue of using public procurement processes that were transparent and that were clear in terms of how, well, first the criteria were clear in terms of what was fundable. And then there was a process for tendering that was clear who won bids and why projects were invested in. I think that together contributed to greater faith in the process. But I would say that initial step in terms of getting people to the table. I should say as well, the Nereus Foundation has worked in Mopti region since 1984. So we have a very strong relationship with the communities that we were already building on that foundation. Our partner, IEDF REAP, also had a similar foundation. And so that was beyond the model, but highly important to the success of it.
Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Jen. Would
Thank
you like to go ahead?
You know, trust is something we have serious deficit about, both internationally and nationally. And I argue that once the powerful takes steps first to establish trust, then we can have trust in a better way. This is one thing from this powerful side, both nationally and internationally. And from the local side, what we need is to build capacity for to make the communities organized so that they can have individually as a person, not powerful. But once they organize themselves in some groups, for example, then that voice is counted. So, and then they can force the powerful to come up with openness, and that is the, I think, key to build kind of resilience at the local level. Once they are made politically and socially powerful, not just financially, because you can dole out. Historically, you have done. Donors and also national governments have doled out money, but that did not build their kind of contributed to their empowerment. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, that question of power and bringing it back down to power is really interesting. So thank you. I wonder, do any of our virtual speakers want to come in on this question of trust? Diksha or Madan?
I can come in.
Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Diksha.
Well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe Madan can answer after me. Okay, so I can come in. I think this is a really important one. And one is, of course, trust in government institutions, and the other is trust within communities as well. And one thing we found in our report was that if you have a well-functioning grievance redressal mechanism, which is sort of tiered, where complaints, first of all, are caught at an early stage, and also that they can be registered at the ward level and then escalated up if needed, is really helpful in establishing trust and also tracking whether grievances are addressed in a timely manner. And the other thing is that you give local stakeholders a role in project implementation itself. So not only do you go through communities like CSOs, local CSOs, to engage them and help build their capacity in understanding what really climate risks are and why adaptation is important, but also you give them grants for sort of carrying out small projects so that they are able to sort of see on their own how funds are directed, draw project proposals on their own, work with procurement on their own, and then the local officials are really crucial in building their capacity in sort of financial management and procurement. But giving communities a role in carrying out small projects also really helps build trust.
Super. Thanks, Diksha. I wonder, Madan, were you trying to come in on this question as well?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I just want to say that in order to address this issue of trust between the stakeholders, I think the model that we have in Nepal, actually, I was just explaining, is multi-stakeholder committee, a committee which is responsible for coordinating, formulating the LAPA, local adaptation plans, and also implementing monitoring, evaluation, all these processes. This is a multi-stakeholder committees formed, which takes charge of that. Over there, we have representations from local governments, we have representation from communities, even the vulnerable communities, gender, even disabled people, all different, voices that they are heard there in that committee, and they are the ones who are monitoring, and they are the ones who are formulating the programs. So I think this is how the trust is somehow or other, the trust building the building of trust within them is happening, and is a very good way of resolving the issue of trust. Actually, this is what our experience in Nepal is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madan. That's really interesting and great to build on the presentation that you gave earlier. We actually have a question now from Eileen, so I'm going to hand the mic over.
Yeah. Well,
I was just going to add to that with my position. In the case of indigenous people, one of the important issues to trust all this process has been, one, that in our case, we want to lead this process. So we have developed different structure that are leading by indigenous people professional, and they adapt. Also, it's important the adaptation of all the structure to the reality and the way of view of the world of the indigenous people. Other of the thing to about trust is, okay, this cultural, we don't say cultural, how do you say that? I don't know right now my English, but I think one of the important issues is also respect all the right of indigenous people. In our case, if there is going to be a experience that came from outside, they have to respect the traditional structure of communication. You cannot go to one community and just start one of these processes, even if the community is going to be very active in the process. And the other thing is we really think about full and effective participation in all the governance structure. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eileen, for bringing in that longer term perspective as well. We have a couple of questions from the virtual audience, but I wonder if there's anyone who's here physically who would like to ask a question, or if we'll jump to the virtual questions. Super.
Yeah. Anna, would you allow me to comment on
yes.
the
I think that's
confidence, trust and confidence?
Landing, sure, go ahead.
Yes, regarding trust and confidence, I want to very much clearly say that the experience from my end has definitely maybe emancipated, I would say, the local government authorities from a very big misconception that before the advent of the UNCDF intervention, it was too much like, no, the local government cannot do it. They do not have the capacity, which always had been a misconception. But with this intervention, it has, not only built the trust and confidence with our stakeholders, but it also has built confidence between the local government authorities and the people that we serve. Because then the people that we are serving are benefiting from basic services they need through the different interventions that are being done at the level of the local government, grassroots levels. So for our side, the intervention has definitely broken that misconception that local government authorities would not be able to carry out interventions at the grassroots or local level. So it has now given a new lease of life for partners to come directly and work with the local government authorities or local government areas and get to the intended beneficiaries in terms of the trust with the finance for proper and also accountable and transparent management of resources and budgeting. So I think with our experience, the interventions has definitely salvaged us from that misconception.
Super. Thanks so much for coming in on that one, Landing. I'm going to hand over to one of our physical audience members for our next question.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the clear and interesting presentations. I think my question is for all panelists, but maybe slightly more directed at Jennifer Abdellah. There was a lot of emphasis on prioritizing women in the DCF initiative, which is a critical priority. But I was also wondering if across the different locally led adaptation initiatives, if there was an emphasis on other groups, other marginalized groups. I'm thinking older persons, persons with disabilities, persons experiencing intersecting forms of marginalization, individuals and groups that we know are traditionally excluded from local planning. So beyond the gender perspective, which is a critical priority, again, I was wondering to what extent your project took these other groups into account, because they are actually highly vulnerable to climate change. Thank you. I'm Jennifer, I work for Humanity and Inclusion, hence the focus of the question. Thank you.
Thanks. So I can speak to what we did in Mali and Senegal, and I should say that it may be in Tanzania and Kenya that things have looked a little bit different. The primary focus groups in our pilot were women and youth, which isn't to say that we didn't look at including other people, but when we thought about how can we intentionally build the mechanisms to include people who are traditionally excluded from decision making, that was the focal area. So there were youth representatives and women who were included in committees. That said, there was effort through the decentralization of decision making, taking decision making so it was closer to where people live, that could then become more inclusive for other groups as well who would be excluded from decision making. And part of that is ethnic groups who are traditionally excluded, and often that sort of follows socio-professional lines as well. So you have an ethnic group that is also a fishing group or a herding group. And so inclusion of those groups within the assessments sort of specifically to understand what their priorities were. I think there was a recognition at the end of the project that simply bringing decision-making local isn't enough to break down those things that exclude people. So you need to do the work to be intentionally inclusive and not just sort of replicate decision-making processes that may have some of those pieces in it. So I think there's still work to do. It was, again, a pilot, so there are iterations to come and more. I don't know if I can just ask, said in Kenya or Tanzania, are there any efforts to include people with disabilities or elderly people or other marginalized groups? I don't want to speak for all of DCF without, because I don't know those as well.
There was an attempt in Kenya to work with people living with disabilities, but I think the big challenge is these are structural issues within society, and certainly in Kenya and Tanzania we found with the committees, even though if you said there needs to be representation by certain categories of people, if it's amongst the community, that is possible. But when you're working at a higher level, so in Kenya we're working at the county level, and a lot of the committee positions were sort of filled by county personnel, and so those personnel tend to be generally always men, and generally older men, and so it was quite difficult then to actually sort of address some of those. Also, you didn't find women in certain areas working there because they just didn't get the jobs in the first place. So I think the pilot can look at mechanisms to address it. It's then institutionalizing that, I think, within processes, and these are intergenerational, and so that longer time frame is really important.
Hope I didn't put you on the spot.
Super, thanks so much, Jen, and also said I think Ramon Cervera from UNCDF is with us virtually and would like to come in on this question. Ramon is a program specialist of UNCDF's locale in Mozambique. So Ramon, please go ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm Ramon Cervera. I'm a program officer in Mozambique and representing UNCDF. So that's a very interesting question, and it's extremely complex because there are a lot of variables to take into consideration. The first one, are the national public policies in the country conducive for inclusion of the broad diversity of people representing society? Second, are local governments capable enough to take the lead in the decentralized planification of adaptive development interventions? Are local communities represented in these discussions? Are the platforms required to have this dialogue between local governments and local populations in place? So once we have all these variables to take into consideration, we can, in Mozambique, we are working with the government to design the methodology for the prioritization of development adaptive interventions and finance. And once we have all this dialogue in place, once we have the local governments leading the dialogue with the local populations, then we create a kind of working groups that it's basically an attempt to represent the broad diversity of society. We have the women, we have the youth, we have CSOs, and we have the leaders selected by the communities themselves. With this kind of inclusive development approach, we are trying to embrace the broad diversity of wishes, development experiences, and interventions that we should be financing for local government. So basically, this is my 2 cents about how complex and difficult, but at the same time worthy is to have an inclusive development planning approach. So back to you, colleagues. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Ramon. We're kind of starting to run out of time, so we have several more great questions in the virtual space. So we're going to have to just pick one, and apologies if your question hasn't been answered. One of the questions is, how can we ensure that locally led strategies are resilient to political change at the local or national level? So it would be great to hear maybe from some of our virtual speakers first, and then we'll come to those in the room. And bearing in mind that we only have a couple of minutes left till the end of the session, so if we can keep it concise so everyone gets a chance to speak, that would be great. So I wonder, Diksha, Madan, Ramon, or Landing, if any of you would like to come in virtually.
So it's me?
Or
Okay.
Ms. Anya, go ahead in person,
Yeah.
and then we'll come to the virtual speakers afterwards.
Yeah, in fact, locally led adaptation can really be a vehicle for transformative adaptation. But if that plan for transformative adaptation, because we cannot do a revolution nowadays in our countries or globally. So if each and every step of a transformative adaptation, for example, plan we have, and each and every step incrementally, if that those steps match with our long-term strategy, then only we can have a real transformational adaptation. Only that. Otherwise, incremental adaptation will not do. Globally, this has been experimented. Incremental adaptation doesn't do unless it is a kind of well-planned, phased strategy towards the long-term goal.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mizan. Really great to bring in that incremental versus transformational side of things. I wonder if any of our virtual speakers would like to come in on this question around locally led strategies being resilient to political change. If not, I think we might pass along to Jen. But I think I hear somebody coming in. Madan, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yeah, let me explain here actually that I mentioned that in Nepal we have the National Adaptation Program of Action at the central and federal level. And that is the one which is guiding the other policies or other frameworks like local adaptation, plan for action. So what I'm saying that within that umbrella, within the guidelines, the works are being done here. The LAPA framework has been formulated based on those NAPA guidelines, and that's how the LAPA adaptation, LAPA is formulated at the local level. So basically, I don't see there is any chances of any conflict or any disagreements. In fact, in Nepal, actually, the central government gives quite a lot of supports on central and provincial governments, provides a lot of supports for LAPA implementation to the local governments. So I think if it is in consistence with the guiding principles of the federal government, I think there is no chances of any such disagreements or discomforts, actually, in my opinion.
Thanks so much, Madan. So I think that's a really, just to say, I think that's a really fantastic question on the political resilience of the approach itself. And thank you, Muzang and Madan, for some really interesting insights on that. I think that's something to really think about as we end this session. So I guess firstly, thank you to all our in-person and virtual speakers. Firstly to Eileen for stepping in at rather late notice to deliver an overview of the principles, and fantastic to have your voice and interaction and collaboration with these local government approaches. And thank you, Jen and Muzang, for the work on the decentralizing climate funds and the migrant-friendly towns. And thank you to our colleagues from the Climate Investment Funds, Diksha, to Madan Poudel from IDE, and from Landa Sana from representing the experiences from the United Nations Capital Development Fund and Local. So I have the unenviable position of trying somehow to wrap up what was an incredibly rich discussion. So I'm sure I'm going to fail miserably at capturing exactly the key points that emerged, but maybe just to take a step back and back to Eileen's introduction on the 8 principles. And I guess all these conversations on locally led adaptation are really trying to reflect of how do we, in this global movement on locally led adaptation, how do we actually deliver it on the ground? It's not just about a set of principles. They're not really important. The real important thing is actually delivering the resilience of communities at the front lines of climate change. And what we've really heard is some fantastic examples of how structures are already in place in many countries, in some of the most vulnerable countries, and we can utilize these structures to really unpack and value the adaptation strategies that local communities have on the ground. And we heard, I guess, particularly from Jen and from Madan, painted a picture, and from Landa Sana, really painting the picture of what these structures look like in different countries, and how it's important to not just think about the local as one level, but the different levels that the local represents, and trying to make sure decision making happens at that lowest local level. We heard about the challenges both of importance of trying to do a new approach. It's business unusual, many of these approaches we heard, and it's challenging. And we heard really important, I think, that refers to the second principle for locally led adaptation, that I guess what I heard is we always need to challenge ourselves on inclusivity, that we're working within a system of structural issues, and we always need to challenge ourselves, ensuring we represent those that are previously being excluded, but always think, are we doing enough, and are we including those that continue to be excluded, and how can we help address some of the structural issues? And this will take time, and we need to be patient. I think we heard some key messages on the importance on that aspect of collaborative approaches, on the role that civil society organizations and community-based organizations and grassroots can play in helping these decentralization structures to work effectively and maybe bring in more inclusivity. And really interesting to hear some examples of, I guess, a different aspect of climate resilience, from generating jobs, from proactively supporting the impact of migration that can help to bring in some inclusivity into those approaches, address conflict. And finally, one of the key points that I also was pulling from this, if I can find my notes, is the importance that these approaches in taking adaptation through local government and decentralization approaches. I think going back to that key question that was asked at the start about, I think I was really interested on that question of corruption and how would people respond to that. And I guess what I was hearing is it's not only just about adaptation and resilience from a climate perspective, but these approaches can make decentralization work more effectively. They can utilize these structures and in delivering support financially, procurement support, can actually ensure these processes are more trustful and more transparent. And the final point, I think, was a huge discussion, I don't know how to even summarize it, but on the importance of trust. And I think I came full circle in that comment, and actually I thought it was a really interesting point at the end that if we get these systems working and they're delivering effective adaptation, that builds trust in itself. And so really interesting points practically on we need effective systems such as transparent grant making, grievance mechanisms that really support trust. And there's some really, I guess, some real tangible things that other institutions in other countries seeking to make decentralization work can really learn from some of those practical cases. So I'm sure I have not captured the breadth of the examples that were covered from our distinguished guests, and thank you hugely again. And if I look at my watch that is 5 minutes fast, I realized, and I thought we were already running over time, but we had 5 minutes left. Yeah, thank you very much, a final thank you, and to our virtual colleagues and all the people who have participated in this virtually. It's really fantastic to be beaming out to you from the COP, so thank you very much.